Hello Zero Books readers and viewers, it's me again, Douglas Lane, and in this video I'll be explaining how it is that progressive attempts to contain and sometimes even remedy the difficulties that modern capitalist society creates often end up deepening, institutionalizing human suffering. Along the way, I'll take an excerpt from Mark Fisher's classic book, Capitalist Realism, and try to at least begin to glimpse a solution for the terrible poverty that we've built into our social world. Let's start in the early 20th century. Start by examining some of the ideas of progressive politicians and thinkers at a point that is close to the inception of the progressive alternative. Let's start with Herbert Croly. Croly was the co-founder, along with Walter Lippmann and Walter Weil, of the New Republic. A political philosopher, Croly advocated for the expansion of democratic participation in government and the workplace. He was a strong advocate for government intervention in both the domestic economy and in the international order. Croly wrote that modern society is terrified by the capitalist and labor organizations to which it has given birth, but it will not continue to be disconcerted and terrified. It is adopting the very political instruments which are necessary for the purpose of keeping control of the increasingly numerous and increasingly powerful agencies of its own life. The attempt, far from being a reactionary reversion to an earlier political and social type, prepares the way, it may be hoped, for an advance towards a better and deeper social and political union, associated with direct popular political action and responsibility. This sounds all well and good, very optimistic, but what Croly didn't realize was that the very political power he hoped could be used as an instrument to keep control of the various oppositional agencies springing forth under capitalism was itself a power shaped by, ruled by, capital. Progressives like Croly were, despite their kindness and noble intentions, considered to be the enemies of another faction, another set of ideologues, with more radical aims. The socialists in America, people like Eugene Debs, rejected the New Republic with its progressive solutions for the problem of capitalism. Debs said, "The working class must get rid of the whole brood of masters and exploiters and put themselves in possession and control of the means of production, that they may have steady employment without consulting a capitalist employer, large or small, and that they may get the wealth their labor produces, all of it, and enjoy with their families the fruits of their industry in comfortable and happy homes. It is therefore a question not of reform, the mask of fraud, but of revolution. The capitalist system must be overthrown, class rule abolished, and wage slavery supplanted by cooperative industry." What should be noticed is that Croly, as a progressive, believed that direct democracy, when properly aimed at the socializing of society by means of programs devised and implemented by cadres of elites, could overcome the fearsome conflict between capital and labor, whereas Debs aimed to abolish the class relation that set up that conflict. In general, the progressives believed the power of the state, whether it was organized to run through direct democratic participation or on a representative basis, could overcome the disharmony that seemed to be endemic to modern society. As the website Digital History put it, progressives like Croly had faith in the power of government and launched reforms in the area of public health, housing, urban planning and design, parks and recreation, workplace safety, workers' compensation, pensions, insurance, poor relief, and healthcare. And one of the unintended consequences of these efforts to use the power of the state to overcome the problems brought on by a class society would be a place called Skid Row. If you enjoy these videos, you should click on the subscribe button and click that bell. And you should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Patrons get access to our behind-the-scenes parrot room discussions, where we let our hair down, dish out gossip, or go into the weeds on topics such as the tendency of the rate of profit to decline, imperialism, and the critical theory of Bernard Morton Capel. You'll also get access to our podcasts on From Crisis to Communization, Reform and Revolution, and the history of the Russian Revolution, just as soon as I can coordinate times to record with Danny and or my kids. Your support makes videos like this one possible. Thanks for watching. Skid Row emerged in the 19th century. The construction of America's railroads provided the context for the name. Transient or seasonal workers, often immigrants, worked on skid roads made out of logs. These were used to transport other logs that would be transformed into railroad tracks. The skid roads made it easier to roll these logs down muddy streets. In Los Angeles, the area where the rail lines that connected Southern California to the rest of America became known as Skid Row, was an area that was soon filled with brothels, bars, single residency occupants hotels, and missions that served these transient railroad workers. But this part of Central City, East Los Angeles, fully emerged as a place for the city's homeless population during the Great Depression. Creation of a neighborhood meant to both contain and serve LA's destitute population was a consequence of both the immiseration of working people during the Depression and of the progressivist assumptions that permeated the New Deal. That is, the assumption that the state could reconcile social justice with capitalism and overcome poverty without changing the mode of production of society, without even any attempt to substantially redistribute the wealth, along with capital's need for what Marx would call a reserve army of the unemployed, helped to create the conditions you see on screen. What is the criteria for being considered mentally ill? I mean, how do you distinguish between a healthy person and a very sick person or a sick person?
Well, Freud said mental illness it means that you don't have the ability to live, work, and love. However, in a more concrete way, it means like, we obviously have the DSM, which is, kind of a bullshit book written by a lot of rich professionals to pathologize different types of behaviors. And we know it's a problematic book, but however, we know that there are real, like measurable, uh, mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, where you have these very tangible symptoms that, manifest in ways that make you act in ways that are problematic, or you're not able to keep a job. But then there's all sorts of nuances, right? Because there's like, are you are you self-medicating with drugs? Did drugs bring the onset of this mental illness? Are you depressed? That's another type of mental illness. Do you have are you antisocial? Like, these are all different kinds of mental illnesses, but I think for me it's simply like, are you able to, I mean, maybe I do go back to Freud's definition. Are you able to live, work, and love? Are you able to maintain relationships? Are you able to maintain jobs? Are you able to live?
Today's Skid Row is not just populated with the working poor, drug addicts, and alcoholics. It is also a haven for the mentally ill, sometimes the severely mentally ill. The level of dysfunction on exhibit on Skid Row might bring one to question whether or not a Marxist analysis of the area is still adequate. Given the pervasiveness and severity of mental illness on Skid Row, you might start to wonder whether those left destitute on the streets of Los Angeles could ever fit into any society. Still, it's worth recalling that our understanding of what mental illness or madness is has changed historically. For example, here's a thumbnail summary of Foucault's description of the history of madness in the West. During the Renaissance, the mad were considered to be divinely inspired, and they were, for a time, integrated into society. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the insane were considered moral failures. They were shuttled away from the rest of society to receive punishments that would correct their errors. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, the mad were no longer considered to be moral failures, but rather considered ill. As Foucault put it, Modern man no longer communicates with the madman. The constitution of madness as mental illness at the end of the 18th century bears witness to a rupture and a dialogue, gives a separation as already enacted, and expels from the memory all those imperfect words of no fixed syntax, spoken falteringly, in which the exchange between madness and reason was carried out. The language of psychiatry, which is a monologue by reason about madness, could only have come into existence in such a silence. On the left today, there is a new notion of mental illness forming, one expressed by Mark Fisher in his book, Capitalist Realism. He wrote, "I want to argue that it is necessary to reframe the growing problem of stress and distress in capitalist societies. Instead of treating it as incumbent on individuals to resolve their own psychological distress, instead, that is, of accepting the vast privatization of stress that has taken place over the last 30 years, we need to ask, how has it become acceptable that so many people, especially so many young people, are ill? The mental health plague in capitalist societies would suggest that instead of being the only social system that works, capitalism is inherently dysfunctional, and that the cost of it appearing to work is very high." However, what we should notice about Fisher's suggestion is that he has not strayed as far as he might have wanted from the progressive vision of the 19th century. Rather than attempting to liberate the insane, seeing them as members of a group created by and maintained by capital, seeing them as a reserve army of proletariat, for instance, Fisher maintains the position that the system of capitalism itself can solve the problem it creates. It can do this by expanding the power of the state. Still, when we examine capitalism's horrors and our attempts to overcome them up close, the temptation to hold on to capitalist realism of one kind or another is hard to resist. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we expect a working class that has been reduced to barbarism and madness to organize to create a new world? Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.